again because they were thirsty. God called Moses to strike a rock for water.
God provides for our thirst.
At Rephidim, the people triumphed against the Amalekites when Moses holds up a staff with the help from Aaron and Hur.
God provides protection.
At Mount Sinai, God makes a covenant and gives detailed instructions to Moses for the tabernacle and worship.
God provides his presence.
God often meets our needs in unique and unexpected ways. Since the beginning of creation, sending Jesus our Savior, and our life now, God provides.
Good morning. I'm going to read today two things. I'm going to first read Hosea 2:14 through 15. Therefore, I am now going to lure her. I will lead her into the desert and speak tenderly to her. There I will give her back her vineyards, and I will make an acre of door of hope. There she will sing as the days in her youth, and as in the days she came up out of Egypt. Now I'm going to read Jeremiah 2:2-3. Go and proclaim in the hearing of Jerusalem. I remember the devotions of your youth, how as a bride you loved me and followed me through the desert, through a land not sown. Israel was holy to the Lord, the first fruits of his harvest. All who devoured her were held guilty, and disaster overtook them.
I could have just passed this on to you and just let you stay up here if you wanted. Okay, all right. Thank you, Sydney, for reading our scripture this morning. Our title of the sermon this morning is Wandering Through Troubles to Trust. That's going to be what we're looking at. That's what happened in the wilderness for the Israelites. We're going to be exploring the story and then seeing how that might translate and apply to us today. Trust, for me, is one of those words, from my point of view, is an easy one to offer somebody else as advice. But it can sometimes be a hard one to actually do. How many times have we encountered someone in need emotionally, financially, physically, and we offer the advice, all you have to do is trust God and he will help you through it. Sounds right, and it is. Trust God. But what about the person we just left behind with our deep and profound wisdom? How are they feeling? When I've had people tell me that, a few thoughts that go through my head might be, I already know to trust God. I thought I already was trusting God. Do they really think I haven't been trusting God? And the last one, maybe I haven't been trusting God. Now, as I look back at these times, instead of taking offense to that advice when people have given that to me, maybe I should have seen that I probably wasn't trusting God like I should. As someone who likes to have things in control and order, I really enjoy trip planning with the youth groups. Because I can have things spelled out and planned out. Sometimes it can be hard for me to let go of things that are out of my plan or out of my control, and I try to gather them back in so I can have control over them. Instead of giving them time to develop and trusting that God is looking out for me, is watching out for me, and is taking care of me. Maybe when I have to be in control of so much of my time, my money, my emotions, my 2-year-old. Okay, there's only so much you can control you can have over a 2-year-old. But when I have to be in control, maybe I'm not really relying on God and calling on God like I should be. Another phrase that someone may say is, just trust me. Trust you? Might depend on who it is. If it's someone we just met or someone who's broken our trust in the past, it might be a little bit difficult to trust that person. But if it's someone who we've had a good relationship with and over time has proved to us that they're trustworthy, it's easier to trust them. It can take a long time to build up a true, fully accepted trust from someone. And this is what we see a little bit in today's message as we look at the Israelites. Now, this is a group that seems to have major trust issues. Just look at them over and over and over again. They're excited and happy to be God's chosen people. Things are going great. God's not at the front of their mind anymore. Things start to turn sour. They grumble. They complain. They try to take control of what's going on. Then they get taught a lesson. They repent, and they're close to God again. It's a continuous cycle with them, over and over again. You would think they would learn, right? That's actually what this story's about, learning to trust. And during the time through the wilderness, that's what happened. Let's look at a little more context, though. Look where they had just came from. The Israelites had just been captive in Egypt for around 215 years. And they wandered around the Egyptian area for around 200 years prior to that. So that's around 400 or more years learning the Egyptian culture, and half of that time was being abused, dominated, and at the bottom of the Egyptian hierarchy as slaves. The Egyptian way of life and thinking isn't what God had in mind for his people. But you don't just unlearn 400 years of history and culture. It took time, it took energy, it took discipline, it took frustration, it took pain and hurt, it took redemption and grace, and it took a lot of training from God to show and teach his people a new and better way of living. When they left Egypt, they first came to the Red Sea where they felt trapped with the Egyptian army closing in on them when the Egyptians changed their mind. Maybe we do want to keep these people around. They complained to Moses, asking why he brought them out of Egypt just to be slaughtered. They had just witnessed God send 10 plagues through Moses as his leader. 10 plagues that showed God's power and how quickly they forgot that God was on their side. God tells Moses to lift his hands, the Red Sea parts, the people walk through, and he saves them yet again. Now imagine with me seeing a group of 600,000 Israelites, and the Bible says that's 600,000 men. So if you can imagine, that's similar to the populations of cities like New Orleans, Washington, D.C., Denver, Seattle, or Boston. Not living in tall towers, but all spread out along the ground. If you add women and children yet, you could put 2 of those cities together, and that's about the size of the population of what the Israelites were. Now put yourself in Moses' shoes for a second. Can you imagine leading a group that size through a desert, on foot, living in tents, trying to navigate without drawing too much attention from their enemies who lived in these big fortified cities? As we move on with today's story, we're going to look at 4 different main parts of their travel. After the Red Sea, they moved to Mount Sinai. So I will be telling a few stories along the way, and I'm going to be just briefly summarizing them, and I'm going to be moving pretty quickly with them. When they find water to drink at Marah, it's bitter, so naturally Moses throws a piece of wood in it, and it becomes sweet. They stop in Elim, which had 12 springs. There's a lot of water there, and it may also have been a little bit symbolic of the 12 tribes of Israel. They soon start complaining about being hungry, And God provides them with manna and quail to get them to stop complaining and to show them that he will provide. We also see the first example of holy war at Rephidim. This is where the Israelites were winning while Moses had his arms in the air. But as he got tired and his arms began to come down, they started losing. So Aaron and Hur, H-U-R, Hur, held his arms up for him. And during that time, they won the battle. The second move is from Mount Sinai to Kadesh. At Sinai, there's a lot of things that happen here. God makes a new covenant with the Israelites. We had the Abrahamic covenant before. And God also gives them instructions for the tabernacle and a place of worship. While Moses is getting these instructions along with the 10 Commandments, which we just heard, thank you for sharing that, Aaron, who is left in charge, caves to the pressures of the people and builds them an idol to worship. This is an example of how strong the influences of Egypt still were among the people. Idol worship, a god that you could physically see, touch, and worship in that way was a norm in Egypt. This God that you can't see, like our God, was a new concept for them. When Moses returns, he judges those who broke the law, and the Levites kill around 3,000 people. Moses smashes the tablets as a way to symbolize to the people how they had just broken their brand new covenant with God. While here, the tribe of Levi is chosen to be priests. At Taberah, the people complain, and fire from God's anger comes down from heaven and burns a number of them. The people who had only been eating manna complained for meat again. We see a couple things happen here. First, God tells Moses he will provide quail for them. Then Moses says, yeah, right, we're out in the middle of the wilderness. Where are we going to get these quail? And God reminds him of all that God's done already. What's happening here with Moses is he's still learning to be a leader, and he is also still learning to trust the power of God. We also see God giving some consequences for the complaining and wanting to go back to Egypt. When the people finally get the quail, those that start eating it get a plague that God sent along with the quail. Aaron offers up a sacrifice to God on behalf of the people to cover their sin from not trusting, and God stops the plague. But still, over 14,000 people died. At Hazareth, Miriam and Aaron, Moses' two closest relationships, speak against Moses' leadership. As a reminder to Moses, or to Miriam and Aaron, that God had chosen Moses, God makes Miriam become leprous for a time, and she has to stay on the outskirts of camp. As they are moving closer to Kadesh, Moses sends 12 spies into Canaan. And as you know, 10 of them came back and said, those people are too big, we can't take them. And 2 of them said that with God helping us fight a holy war like he's done in the past, we can take them. We can take this land that God's given us. God's punishment for not trusting is that anyone 20 years and older will never make it to the promised land. After Moses tells this to the people, the 10 that said we can't do it and the tribes they represented had a change of mind. Yeah, let's go do this. We can take them. They get badly beaten when they try to go and march against them. The third move is from Kadesh to Ezion. On their way to Ezion, Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, who were of the Levite tribe, led a revolt with 250 other leaders against Moses and Aaron's leadership. God's judgment on them and a reminder to everyone else is that the ground opened up and swallowed all 250 of them and their families. And then it closed back up like nothing ever happened. Aaron's rod that he carried with him buds and bears almonds. And this was a confirmation of his role as the priestly leader over the Levites. Again, we have the people complaining about not having enough water. God instructs Moses to speak to the rock this time instead of hit it. But Moses, frustrated and tired of the complaining, hits the rock like he had done before. The punishment for Moses and Aaron's disobedience was that they also wouldn't make it to the promised land. The people, once again, complaining about food, God sends snakes to bite them. He has Moses make a bronze snake that he puts on a pole, and those who look upon the snake who have been bitten are healed. The fourth and final move was from Ezion to the Jordan River. The Israelites are forced to go around Edom because the king who saw this huge mass of people coming to his city said, "No, you cannot come through our walls." So they had to go around. As they come up to the Amorites also refuse, but the Israelites finally are starting to trust God, that God would give them the territory. And through holy war, God defeats the Amorites, and the Israelites begin to take possession of the land as God had promised. Balak, the king of Moab, now fearing his tribe of desert wanderers, tries to get the prophet Balaam to put a curse on the Israelites because he's scared of them. But Balaam instead gives a blessing. While camped on the plains of Moab, the Israelites began to worship Baal of Peor. They had just gotten through taking over a couple cities with God's help, and they turned back to a false god. A judgment plague kills 24,000 Israelites. These have been just a few stories of unfaithfulness, revealing God's judgment and grace on his people, along with a few stories showing the Israelites beginning to learn that they could trust God and that God would always be with them. So what do these stories mean? What was the purpose of God killing all those people? That seems a little harsh, doesn't it? One of the things I didn't mention in most of these stories that we just looked at today, God gives them an out. He gives them a second opportunity, and they still refuse to take it. Then God goes through with his punishment. God provided for them over and over and over again and gave them chance after chance after chance. And he's still doing that for us today. Again, we have to remember that these were people who were ex-slaves. They had come from a culture that was opposite of what God intended for them. The Egyptians were oppressive, took what they wanted, manipulated, and lived with a me-first attitude. They only looked out for themselves. This was even at the cost of abuse and death of other people, if it meant furthering their gain. This may sound a little bit like our culture to some extent. Maybe not the death part so much, but a lot of the rest of it. I mean, we may not be in the middle of a wilderness, but we sure have a lot of obstacles and baggage that keep us from trusting, don't we? Look at what we see on the media, on TV, in our music. It's all about bettering ourselves. I mean, if I don't look out for me, who's going to look out for me, right? This isn't God's purpose for us. This isn't what God wants. Take a look at our own lives. Is God still working in us? Is he still trying to get us to trust him and teach us to trust him like he did the Israelites? I think he is. When we get bogged down with how lousy life can be sometimes, are we remembering back to the numerous times that God pulled each and every one of us out of the dumps? Often when I look at my own life, I get down on how it's going, I have to realize that I'm probably in this spot because I may be relying too much on my own abilities and trying to keep control of everything. And not letting God do his work in his time. God's plan was to develop what is called a theocratic shalom missional community. We'll go with shalom community. Shalom means when all things are right in relationship. When all things are right in relationship. You can't have shalom when you have this other culture guiding our thoughts and our actions. God showed them judgment for falling away, but he also showed them grace and showed them that he would provide for them. We so often can get caught up in this Old Testament God, like we just see with the wrath and the fire of God, that's what we think when we think of God and we fear him. Yes, his wrath is something to fear, but Jesus came to show us the true characteristics of God in human form, a form that we understand and can see. Jesus' first action isn't wrath or fireballs from heaven. It once again comes back to loving God and loving those around you. This is what this shalom community was all about that he was trying to create in the Israelites. This is what God was trying to build among them. He was showing them that there's no difference between the rich and the poor, and that when we're all trusting God, we're all on equal ground. As mentioned earlier, the Levites were the tribe that was elevated to be in charge of worship. They were given a bunch of rules for worship and everyday living that would also lead to this shalom community. Sure, it looks like a bunch of boring rules to read, a lot of laws to remember that look like they would just suck the fun out of life, don't they? But again, we have to remember where they came from. The leadership they came from in Egypt was brutal and coercive. They needed a very strict set of laws to follow, or they would easily fall back to the way they were during their time of wandering around the Egyptian region, part of that being as captives the 400 previous years they spent there. These laws were to get them started into the shalom community that we've talked about, to make sure that everyone was living in a right relationship. Remember, though, it's been simplified for us today through Jesus. Love God and love those around you. All along their journey, they grumble and complain. Sometimes it's everyone, and sometimes it's just a small group. But how quickly they forget the goodness that God has given them and focus back on what they feel is bad about what's going on right now. But not only that, they remembered all the great things about Egypt, and they forgot all the bad that went along with it. Egypt was not good, but that's where they wanted to go back to. This message is for us as well. We need to stop focusing on the tough stuff now. We need to remember what God has brought us through in the past. And Wes is going to be preaching on this idea of remembering to remember more next week. But we can start to see through our stories today that the Israelites struggled with this at times. And I have to admit, I do too. It's so easy to focus on the bad stuff of the here and now that we forget where God has brought us out of. I forget what God's brought me through. We all have tough stuff that we carry around like baggage. For some, it might be pressure from work. Your boss may have put a deadline on a project that's behind. You and your whole team have to stay to work at it. You have to put in extra hours. You can't spend the time with your family like you think you should be able to. And that's more baggage. It could be the stress, anxiety, and uncertainty that the raw, untapped, powerful emotions that an almost 3-year-old can bring without warning. It's more baggage. It could be pressures from school, coaches, teachers, or even our own parents to achieve at a high level. More baggage. Then, sometimes when our baggage gets to be too much, we can't handle it anymore, we try to throw it on somebody else. And the next person that comes upon us and even pushes our buttons just a little bit, we snap and try to throw our baggage on them so we don't have to deal with it. But you know what that does? More baggage. Our baggage might somewhat correlate with the wilderness stories of the Israelites. We're obviously in a very different time, but we are on a journey through a wilderness just like the Israelites. We're each on a different path, but we're all on a path where God is continually working in us, building us, molding us, shaping us into the chosen people that He desires. An interesting thing about the Israelites is that hundreds of years later, the prophets would look back at them and marvel at their faith and trust in God. They would call upon their fellow Israelites to remember back to the time in which God molded and shaped them as His chosen people during their experiences in the wilderness. And we saw that in the passages that Sydney read this morning. I'm going to reread Jeremiah 2 passage, this time from the Message, as it's paraphrased there. Jeremiah 2. God's message came to me, and it went like this. Get out in the streets and call to Jerusalem God's message. I remember your youthful loyalty, our love as newlyweds. You stayed with me through the wilderness years, stuck with me through all the hard places. Israel was God's holy choice, the pick of the crop, and anyone who laid a hand on her would soon wish he hadn't. So we've got all this baggage, but you know what? I'm doing okay. I can handle it on my own, right? I can keep all of this under control. But then I get to that one. That one has all our hidden stuff in it. Our secret sin, our emotions that from carrying all of this around, that we try to keep hidden so everybody knows we're doing just fine. Thanks for asking. But the thing about that bag is, we've got to carry that one too. At some point, our wilderness becomes too much. We can't handle it on our own anymore. We can't keep it hidden. It really sticks out more than we think we might be able to keep it under control. And then I remember the words of Christ, I have come that you may have life and that you may have it abundantly. Is this abundant living? Doesn't feel like it right now. Then I remember some other words from Christ. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. That sounds nice right now. That's all I want. And then I cry out to God, God, I can't take this anymore. And if it would be your will, would you please take this from me? And you know what? He does. He takes it, and we can find our rest in trusting the one who loves us more than anyone here on earth ever could. The one who's got our back no matter what. As we wrap up this message, you were all given a bag as you came in today. I want you to take that bag, and there's two things I want you to write on it. If you're not comfortable writing on it and just want to throw these things in your bag mentally, you can do that. If you don't have a bag, raise your hand. We've got more in the back, and the ushers are going to bring some around to you. What I want you to write is on one part of the bag, I want you to write some baggage, something that's been pulling you down, weighing you down, something you've been trying to keep under control, something that you've been not letting God take control of, something that you're ready to say, okay, God, I get it. I've been holding on to this for far too long now, and I'm giving it to you. That's one part of the bag. On the other part of the bag, I want you to write something, sometime when you remember God has pulled you through. An experience that you look back on and say, you know what, as I look back at that, that wasn't because of me. That was God pulling me through that. Again, if you don't want to write it down on there, that's fine. You can just throw it in there mentally. We're not going to be reading them. But in a little bit, I am going to be having you bring all your baggage up front. As you're writing those things, I'm going to close with a few more thoughts here. God isn't creating a wilderness for us to go through, but He may be letting us go through a time of wilderness. We get ourselves into that wilderness pretty good on our own. But God's going to help us through, but not alone, mind you. He's walking with us, guiding us, developing us, and making us stronger and breaking down obstacles and getting them out of our way so that we can trust in Him fully. He's trying to get our attention on Him and not what's pulling us in different directions and what's weighing us and pulling us down. So when we get through this wilderness and we set our baggage down, we can look back at all the ways that God has led us. And we can be thankful that we have such a God to put our trust in for the future. Thankful of where we've come from and thankful of where we will go. We're going to close with a song. And while I'm singing this song, I want you to bring your bag forward to the front. Set it on the stage, on the steps, somewhere up here. And if you need assistance, the ushers are happy to assist you or to take your bag for you, to bring that up as well. Again, we aren't going to be reading any of these, so you don't have to worry about that. But as we sing this song, please bring your bag forward. This song is called Come As You Are, and it's written by David Crowder. Please come forward. Come out of sadness from wherever you've been. Come broken-hearted, let the rescue begin. Come find your mercy, O sinner, come kneel. Earth has no sorrow that heaven can't heal. Earth has no sorrow that heaven can't heal. So lay down your burdens, lay down your shame, and all who are broken, lift up your face. O wanderer, come home, you're not too far. So lay down your hurts, lay down your heart, and come as you are. There's hope for the hopeless and all those who've strayed. Come sit at the table, come taste the grace. There's rest for the weary, rest that endures. Earth has no sorrow that heaven can cure. So lay down your burdens, lay down your shame, and all who are broken, lift up your face. O wanderer, come home, you're not too far. So lay down your hurts, lay down your heart, and come as you are. Come as you are. Fall in his arms, and come as you are. There's joy for the morning, O sinner, be still. Earth has no sorrow that heaven can't heal. Earth has no sorrow that heaven can't heal. So lay down your burdens, lay down your shame, and all who are broken, lift up your face. O wanderer, come home, you're not too far. So lay down your hurts, lay down your heart, and come as you are. So lay down your burdens, lay down your shame, and all who are broken, lift up your face. O wanderer, come home, you're not too far. So lay down your hurts, lay down your heart, and come as you are. So lay down your hurts, lay down your heart, and come as you are. Come as you are. Come as you are. As you look up front, we've got bags all over the stage. We all have baggage. We all have things that we have trouble letting go of and trusting God with. We're not in this alone. We're a community that's in this together. On the other side of this, we also all have times and places that God has pulled us through. He's pulled us out of, and he'll do it again. As we go, I invite you to trust God. Go in peace.